Class, welcome to week 4. This is Dr. Halstead again. This week we're going to be covering narrative therapy, which is actually my favorite model. It's the umbrella under which I do utilize many of the other models, but I use the narrative metaphor as I'm dealing with and thinking about my clients, so I really enjoy this model. Good job on the solution focused. You did a good job with the discussion posts. I, of course, haven't read your questions yet as you're turning them in tonight. Some of you, I see, have already turned them in. But you did a good job identifying the uses of solution focused and some of the questions that you can use with that modality. I do agree, some of you mentioned this, but I do agree or disagree a little bit with the Dolan video that those who are proponents of the model, solution focused, and use it primarily as their sole model, think that you can use it with almost any type of client problem. So there's just a variance in perspective on that. As we begin to talk about narrative therapy, I just want to explain it to you a little bit that might help grasping it. I know it's a lot to read a whole book and try to grasp a model. So if you think of, and this is kind of challenging to do without a whiteboard, but if you think of a client system in regards to their past, present, and future. A client comes in and they have a problem-saturated story. And that basically means that everything is dark and they cannot see anything beyond this dark story that they have. And you'll hear them as they're telling you evidence to support this problem-saturated story. So they keep finding more and more evidence that might describe how much of a failure they are, or how terrible their marriage is, or that they're inadequate or worthless. And so you'll hear them building this story or telling you about it. And the perspective of narrative therapy is that you do spend time in the past, and that's a little different than solution focused, in that you allow the client the opportunity to share their pain. And some clients aren't willing to move forward until they know that they've been heard. And so that's a perspective of narrative. So as you're listening to their problem-saturated story, you as a therapist are accenting different aspects of the story. Some parts of the story that they're not aware of because they have this problem-saturated lens on. So in solution focus, that would be called exceptions. So I'm looking for unique outcomes that don't fit in with their story. So for example, I had a client who was a mother of 2 teenage boys, and her husband had an affair and left to be with her best friend. So she was really hurting, and she had gone back to school. She had never gone to school because she had worked him through college, and she had a severe learning disability, dyslexia, and so school was a real struggle for her, but she was doing it. But it was really hard, and so she just felt like a failure, that everything she'd done was wrong, and her husband had left her, her best friend had left her, school was hard, she felt like she was stupid. And so just all of these things that fed into this problem-saturated story. Well, as she was sharing her story, I was able, because I was objective, to hear some things that were outside of this lens she was sharing with me. And one was that she was a terrific mother. She loved those boys, and she was a good parent. And so as she talked about her story, she wasn't even aware of that because she was so focused on this other. So I would talk about, boy, you love those boys. Boy, you're good with them. And I would accent those things. And I said, every time you're knocked down, you just bounce back up. You're resilient. And I saw that in the way that she kept going, even after her husband had left her and her best friend had left her. And she got up every day and took care of those boys and went to school. And even though school was really hard, she just kept at it. So I just kept pointing out those things that were going well in her story, and that she had some strengths. And it can't be made up things, and that's really important with narrative. It has to be things that are actually there, otherwise it sounds just patronizing. So as we talked about her story, after a while she started telling me times she would come into a session and say, I am resilient. This happened this week, and she would share a situation. So she started to see her story in a broader way. And then at the same time you're doing that, you're externalizing, and you'll read about that this week, but you're externalizing the problem, the primary problem. So of course there's lots of problems she's dealing with, but the main thing she kept saying repeatedly was failure. I'm such a failure. And so that became something that we externalized. So I started talking about it as, she would use that language about I'm a failure, and I started talking about it as an it. So how often during the day is failure with you? And she would say, oh, all day, every day. And so I would have her chart that during the week. Okay, every day I want you to chart the percentage that failure is with you. And so some days it was 100%, some days it was 10%, some days it was 50%. So then we would look at those days. What was going on this day that you were able to keep it down to a 10%? And so you're removing the problem from them so that they see themselves as separate from the problem, and it's something that they can address. And then that, coupled with the unique outcomes you've been identifying in their problem-saturated story, she begins to feel hope that maybe I'm not such a failure, and maybe my story isn't so dark, as she sees herself as resilient, and that I can fight this failure and overcome it. And then she moves into the future with that same hope and can deal with each day with some hope that I can do this. So it's using, again, the metaphor of story or narrative, that we've had this story that's been dark, but today's a new day. What do you want to call this chapter? And what do you want this new phase of your life, this new chapter, to look like and be called? So that's just, in a nutshell, that's narrative therapy, but just wanted to explain that to you. But take care, and you're doing well. You've had a lot of assignments in the first couple of weeks, but it will level out now as we get into the major models. Now it's mostly reading that you'll have to stay on top of. So as we cover narrative, collaborative language systems, and EFT, and then we'll finish off with the meta models, or the common factors. But you're doing well, so hang in there. Let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you later. Bye.